Hey, this is Mark Smith, and welcome to the webinar titled How to Automate EPA Compliance and Avoid WEC Fees. This webinar is with Mark Smith. I'm the co-founder of CleanConnect.ai, and Russ Perry from Sequitur. So, you're here and you're wondering, am I in the right place? Well, you are. If you want to learn from an actual operator how he built objective evidence for compliance for Quad O, B, and C, and super emitter prevention, and zero methane fee goal. That's the goal, right? So a little bit about me. I'm the co-founder of CleanConnect.ai, host of Digital Roughnecks, a video podcast, founder of Windows NT Magazine, and author of the EPA cheat sheet. And CleanConnect is a hardware-enabled SaaS company, so we make our own cameras. First government-approved continuous OGI source-level leak detection system. First government-approved source-level GHG intensity verification protocol. The 2022 and 2023 Darcy Partner Top Innovator Award winners, and winners of the Oil and Gas Tech Challenge. So I'm here with Russ Perry, and Russ is the Corporate Health, Safety, Environment, and Regulatory Director. He manages a team of 9 HSE professionals aimed at surpassing mere compliance to foster a proactive safety culture. And he's got 30 years of HSE experience in metals, mining, and energy sectors, and expert in regulatory compliance, environmental auditing, and remediation management. He speaks at a lot of conferences. In fact, we were both speaking at 4C, and we said, hey, why don't we do a webinar together, which is the reason for this webinar today. And full disclosure, Sequitur is a client, a customer of CleanConnect.ai. In his past, he led BP's team post Deepwater Horizon incident to achieve 100% compliance with government agreements and consent orders. And he's a licensed professional geologist in Texas, holds a BSc in geology from the University of Illinois at Urbana. So with that, I want to turn it over to Russ Perry, who will take it from here.
Before I get started, I got to go over a disclaimer here first. Is the opinions that I'm going to express here in the presentation, those are solely mine. I'm not representing Sequitur Energy Resources or SEM Operating. These are my opinion, and these are my experiences that I've seen working in this space over the past couple of years. But we had a very unique strategy and a series of goals when the Quad O-B regulations came out. Quad O-C, they are final, so we have some resolution on there. I will mention too that I've heard Subpart W regulations will be issued within 2 to 6 weeks. They have came out of the Office of Management and Budget. They've been approved. They got sent back to EPA for signature and release. So those are going to come out 3 months ahead of schedule. That will change people's effects on how they look at Subpart W and the regulations, and it'll give you some very good guidance or strategy that you need to look at. Now, when all these regulations and the proposed regulations came out, we were all very focused, and we had some very unique goals. Some of those was compliance, emission reductions, and the key thing was we wanted to get to a zero waste emission charge, zero fees. And so what I'm going to go through here is kind of our journey, what we had to look at in order to get to a point where we could put hand on heart and say, we are going to get to a zero waste emission fee. Things that we all know, Quad O-B, C, they came out final, and they will be finalized and effect on May 7th. The waste emission charge came out in January, which was the proposal from EPA on how those are going to be charged. Subpart W, right here, my slide says 3Q. That could be less than 6 weeks away. But what people really need to understand is with Subpart W, there are the emission factors are going to go up anywhere from 2 to 8 times higher than what they are now. We're all familiar with the super emitter program. So what we want to do is make sure that we keep our facilities in compliance and we avoid those situations where there could be a super emitter event. Quad OC is forthcoming. The states are going to propose that. But the message that you're going to hear over and over is that early adoption of the Quad OBC standards on all your assets will effectively reduce your emission fees and make compliance more streamlined. In other words, if you adopt these standards on your older facilities and facilities that aren't applicable to Quad OB, you adopt those earlier, you will get to a zero waste emission fee sooner. So we've all seen this slide before, and this is from EPA, but the assets that are in red, those are the subpart W industry segments that apply to the waste emission charge. For Sequitur Energy Resources, SEM operating, segments the onshore production and the gathering and boosting segments apply to my company. So I'm going to focus on those areas. Some of you might have multiple assets, also including potentially gas processing plants, or if you have midstream. But kind of my message is really going to focus on the onshore production and gathering and boosting. And you're like, wow. Now, just for clarity, SEM operating, we operate solely in the Southern Midland Basin in 4 counties. We are an exploration and production company, and we own a lot of our midstream infrastructure, so our own gathering and our pipeline. We don't officially have compressor stations, if you will. That goes to an off-taker. They purchase our gas, but they are officially the midstream. We just own a majority of our infrastructure. Now, looking at the waste emission charge, where do you start? How do you streamline your compliance and also get to a point where your waste emission charge is zero or near zero? There's a lot of places. So one of the best places to start is understand your subpart W greenhouse gas report and your calculations. You're going to have to own it. You're going to have to understand all those different source categories, what they mean, and what information goes into it. Take your 2022 data and your 2023 data and use the proposed waste emission charge calculation and calculate what your fees are. That's one of your first things you're going to do. You need to inform your management what those potential fees are. Now that you have a baseline of what those fees are going to be, you need to look at, hey, I need to take that money, invest it back into my infrastructure, and make those improvements to reduce your fees. Don't make a donation to the WEC. Don't send your money to the government. Reinvest that money. When you're going to look at your subpart W, you want to look at what's your biggest bang for your buck. Where do you need to reinvest that money? You're going to start with your largest source categories. So that's what we mean by you need to understand your subpart W and dissect it. You need to make an informed decision from your data. You need to look at what changes you can implement now solely from administrative or engineering changes, and then how do you improve your record keeping? One thing we found year over year is when we look at our data, we noticed, hey, we can improve our record keeping. That's an easy ask, but once you have improved data and improved empirical numbers, your actual calculated data can go down. All right, so where do we start? Here's a good place to start. This is from US EPA. This is a summary of all the greenhouse gas reporting on the onshore production for the years 2011 to 2021. Why does this matter? Well, this lets you know what everyone else has been reporting for the past 10 years. So the numbers in blue on these bar charts is CO2, and the number in the red is methane. Now, keep in mind, we all know the waste emission charge is based on the methane. You got to start at your largest methane emission sources. Now, the national average, based on all the data submitted, has always been on pneumatic devices. You, at each of your individual companies, have to figure out what your data is telling you. For my company, this aligns perfectly. Pneumatic devices were the top, followed by equipment leaks, flaring, well unloading. So you got to understand the source categories. You got to understand your methane numbers. And we'll get into why it really matters on pneumatics. Now, our journey started with pneumatics. All right. So we did a quantitative analysis. We looked at each segment, so gathering and boosting and production. And then we looked at each of the source categories. We had to dissect that information. We calculated what our potential waste emission charge was. We informed management what that is. They came back, and our goal is zero year after year. And what do we have to do to get there? We charted all this out, and we created some very unique informed decisions. We risk ranked our facilities. We risk ranked our categories, specifically on the methane portion. And we wanted to really understand where we needed to direct monies. How do we improve facilities? How do we improve automation? How do we improve our data in order to get these numbers down? So we identified our biggest bang for the buck was focusing solely on pneumatics. Now, some companies might say, hey, we've already addressed our pneumatics. Well, make your informed decision, create something that's fit for purpose. But you're going to do the same process. You're going to look at your categories and you're going to review your data. We identified that pneumatics in our subpart W, especially on the gathering and boosting side, was 80% of our methane portion. That was the right place for us to identify. So when we went back and we looked at all of our pneumatics, we found that we counted our pneumatics incorrectly. So one of the consultants we had, they wanted us to go out and count every type of pneumatic device. Well, what we found was we were including zero bleed and temperature controllers and pressure regulators that don't bleed. So we found that our pneumatic inventory, one, we were over-reporting in our previous years by up to 60%. So we want to make sure we're reporting the data correctly. It makes a difference now that it has been monetized. So in the past, the greenhouse gas report typically just sat in a sustainability group or an environmental group, and that didn't really move the needle as far as a monetized or a monetary number. Now that the waste emission charge started January 1st of this year, it will make a difference year over year. So now that once we've identified areas of improvement, which was our pneumatics, we had to decide the pneumatics had to fall into which segment. And I'll get into why this is important. If you are only reporting in one segment, production or gathering and boosting, I got some information here that's really going to be important for you to watch. So in 2022, we did a very conservative review of our previous year's subpart W. And we identified that one, we were reporting in the wrong segments. And two, in our strategy, we identified that by converting central tank batteries to compressed air, we would have the largest effect of reducing our pneumatics year over year. So good informed analysis, we created a decision, a strategy, and a roadmap on how we were going to get there. Now, I did mention that US EPA in the subpart W changes that are coming out within the next 2 to 6 weeks there are going to be some very drastic changes coming in the emission factors. Now, this list right here gives you an example of what these emission factors are going to look like in these proposed rules. So this was in what came out in June of 2023. These were the proposed emission factors that EPA proposed. We're going to be seeing those final coming up here real shortly. So why does that matter? Well, this gives you an idea of what we were dealing with. So in 2023, on the production side, this is what we are looking at in our subpart W calculation, just on the methane portion. As you can see, pneumatics in the production for us was 86%. Now, what we identified taking this data, this methane data, and plugging it over into the waste emission charge calculations, we found that on their production side that we were below the 0.2 emission threshold, but on the gathering and boosting side, we were just above that number of the 0.05%. And in both of those segments, as shown here, the pneumatics were our single largest source of methane emissions. So improvements can be made in the other areas, such as liquids unloading and flaring. Those are kind of our secondary areas where we've put administrative controls in to reduce flaring. In other words, making a decision to shut in wells in lieu of flaring. Those are more or less administrative controls that you can put in place very easily just based on facility and company policies. So when we look at pneumatics, I'm gonna focus right there. Is one, we knew that we had to go after pneumatics first. Taking the subpart W data and working backwards, we found that each pneumatic controller that we converted saved 1.5 metric tons of methane per year. Now that's just working backwards. What that gives you an idea of, for every pneumatic you convert, you can actually create a goal. If you had to reduce, let's say, your methane by 1,500 metric tons, you knew that you had to look at approximately 1,000 units. So that's just a good number to have. We also identified that for pneumatic pumps and for the pneumatic controllers, there is a difference between runtime hour calculations, and some people call it the pneumatic loophole in subpart W, but EPA did come out and say that it's not the actuation time for a pneumatic, it's actually the amount of time it's pressurized. So one thing you can consider for pumps that are manually operated, in other words, you have to physically turn a valve, you can use the actual runtime in lieu of a 8760 hours per year if you manually operate your pneumatic pump. So that's just kind of a hack that you can use when you're doing your subpart W calculations. One of the things we did is we identified how many batteries we needed to convert in 2023 in order for when 2024 hit, we would have a zero waste emission charge. So in 2023, we converted 37 central tank batteries to compressed air, and we are just right at that sweet spot where the waste emission charge will be zero or near zero just from doing those conversions. One thing that we've also seen in Quad OB is that there is a 1-year compliance date to get your pneumatic controllers. So EPA did rename our new natural gas pneumatic devices over to the name pneumatic controllers. There's a 1-year compliance date for your Quad OB applicable facilities and your Quad OB applicable devices. Now, one thing I will say is don't wait. If you are an early adopter and you convert these early, you will see year over year, your emissions and your fees will be reduced just by being an early adopter of converting these pneumatic controllers over either to compressed air, or you're routing that source back to a process. Those are the two most cost-effective ways, in lieu of buying a new type of controller or a zero bleed controller. So just being an early adopter, and just think about that. Flaring. So flaring is our second largest source in for waste emissions in these calculations. Now, in 2023, in those numbers, we used a 98% efficiency. But if you look, the proposed rules, which we'll see here in a few weeks, they're going to go down to 92%. So you're going to have a significant reduction in your flare efficiency, and your numbers are going to go up. And that's just from an emission, a calculation. You didn't change your asset. It's just EPA said, hey, you're going to use a different calculation method. So going forwards, your flare efficiency is going to be paramount, and a system to monitor and verify that your flare is operating efficiently is going to be important to verify compliance underneath the Quad OB requirements. So let's look through a couple things. And one, we do know that the waste emission charge, right, that came out. It's not final yet, but it came out here in January. We realized that in that WEC fee, the number that EPA uses for methane, they assume in that calculation that the gas you're venting is 100% methane. So if you have natural gas venting, for us, it's only 75% methane when there's a venting event. But in the WEC fee, EPA is assuming that is 100% methane. So we saw that isn't a very fair part of the calculation. So we actually try to create an empirical data, and our waste emission fee would actually be lower if we used actual empirical data for calculating that waste fee. Now, let's talk about the methane allowance. Now, you're going to see that, or the methane threshold. So that's different for each segment. So EPA gives you what they believe is your threshold. So production is 0.2%, gathering is boosting is 0.05%. Here's what two takeaways from this slide that are kind of important is, if you're upstream and you've been reporting just in production segment, I'm going to go through a couple determinations here, but if you have centralized tank batteries, you should be reporting also in the gathering and boosting, because the centralized tank batteries fall underneath the gathering and boosting segment, not production. And that's through EPA's own definitions. But what that allows you to do is, you have two, now that you report in two segments, you now have two allowances. In other words, you're calculating two methane allowances for the same volume of gas, and those can also qualify for netting. I have a couple slides and we'll go over that. Now, what does that really mean? The key point here is, now if you notice, the production allowable emissions are 4 times higher than the gathering and boosting, which means is dollar for dollar, everything that you do to affect the gathering and boosting side gives you a 4x return of investment or payback for reducing emissions on the gathering and boosting side, only because those allowable emissions are 4 times higher. So here's a couple scenarios. Let's say you are an upstream producer and you've been reporting in the production only segment for the past, since 2011. That's kind of when the regulations came out. So you've been reporting there. Why are you reporting there? Well, our consultant told us. Well, if you look through the definition of a centralized tank battery, you're going to find that centralized tank batteries fall underneath the gathering and boosting side. What would this mean for a smaller producer? If you're a smaller producer, if you bifurcate or you identify where you need to reallocate your production and your gathering and boosting data based on the EPA definitions, you might find that you might be exempt from either the greenhouse gas reporting altogether, or you might find that, you know what, we might just have a smaller number for production and the gathering and boosting side is small. This is something that you as an operator need to look at your data and look at the definitions and see where you might fall. Here's another example. So you need to look at the true definitions underneath production and gathering and boosting. We did that between 2021 and 2022, and we found that we were reporting information in the wrong segments. So we did a very careful recount of our pneumatics. We looked at which data was placed into which segment. We made the appropriate change through advice of legal counsel. So legal counsel was aware of the regulations and the definitions, and we made this very strategic and by required change into the proper segments. So once again, why this is important, why this is going to move the needle in your future years is because, once again, the allowable emissions are 4 times higher on the production side compared to the gathering and boosting side. So having your data in the right segment is imperative going forwards now that this has been monetized. This is one of the examples I'm going to give you. Now, this source data came from EPA guidance documents, and this is just one of the examples I have to understand how you bifurcate your information. Now, I have here on the left, you have well pads going to individual well separators at a centralized tank battery. In the EPA guidance documents, they're saying everything that's in the blue should be in the production side. Everything in red should be on the gathering and boosting side. Where is that demarcation line? Now, this is going to be difficult because you have to take a centralized tank battery and you have to divide it. Part of it is production segment, part of it is gathering and boosting. It might be easy to just say, hey, it's all production. It might be easier to say, hey, that's all gathering and boosting. But just going by the definitions, it gets you into the right place. Where EPA says that demarcation line is when you mix well streams, mixed fluids between different wells. So here, my wells go to their own individual separator, and then they go into common storage tanks. If you did this the other way, if you had one large heater treater at this facility, your demarcation point would be between the wellhead and the separator. That's where you've commingled fluid between the different segments. I mentioned bifurcating and demarcating between your two segments. It's important to understand the definitions. These definitions come either out of Quad OB or Subpart W. And keep in mind, Subpart W, we're going to have, with these regs being published here in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have additional clarity of what these true definitions are, since they're going to be coming out. Some of these were from proposed in 2023. Keep in mind, production started that those definitions came out in 2011. Gathering and boosting under Subpart W didn't come out until 2015. So you need to understand where you're pulling your definitions from and make sure that when you're doing your demarcation, you're doing it appropriately. All right. The waste emission fees. This is probably one of the most paramount things you have to understand is your waste emission fee is going to be based upon your total throughput at your sales point. Now, this throughput includes all the natural gas and hydrocarbon liquids that are transported downstream from the facility out of your gas sales meter. So when you ask your accounting department or your production or your royalty or your operations department, what is our gas sales meter number? You're going to get probably 4 different numbers. And I received 5 different numbers depending on who I asked and how I asked the question. This is really key because your waste emission charge is based upon a calculation from that gas sales meter at the back end of your facility. For my company, it is a wet gas. It is a gross gas. It happens to align with our Texas Railroad Commission well production data. But it is a wet number. If I ask accounting, they give me a dry gas number because they get information from our midstream buyers that breaks out NGLs, butane, propane, ethane. So you want to get this right now. You need to understand this gas sales meter number. All right. Different insights, different areas. Since your waste emission fee is based upon your gas sent to sales, you need to maximize that. And there's couple areas that you want to focus on, right? More gas to sales means you have a lower calculated waste emission fee. These are my top things to make sure that your VRUs are sized properly, they have high reliability and good runtime. For most of us operating in the Permian, it's the vapor recovery units that are on our vapor recovery towers and our tanks is putting additional gas into the sales line, right? And with high line pressure, you have to have the VRUs to get that gas into the line. You want to make sure your alarms are turned on and you get those notices promptly. We have one facility where we have the Clean Connect AI system. And what we noticed when all of a sudden we get an alarm. We get an alarm from the Clean Connect system within 10 minutes saying, hey, we have thief hatches leaking. Why are the thief hatches leaking? Well, what we identified was our VRU went into default. So after 10 minutes of these VRUs being down, we started seeing a little poof on our thief hatches at this facility. And we get this alarm from Clean Connect. We notify the lease operator. Lease operator's there within 15 minutes. He's there, he's on site, and he tells us, yep, the VRU's down. He hits the reset button. The VRUs go back 5 minutes. Thief hatches stop venting. What we found was our alarm system on our VRUs had an 8-hour default window. In other words, it wasn't going to send a message to the lease operator for 8 hours. So what that tells me is my alarms aren't timely enough. So we have to reset, repurpose your alarms to make sure that it's communicating something that's appropriate to reduce emissions. Now, flaring. So just want to touch on it really short, briefly here. Limit your flaring as much as you can. You know, if you leave that gas in the formation, in other words, you're not producing that gas, right? It does a couple things. One, you're not burning that gas. You're not going to pay a royalty on it. You're not going to increase your emissions because when you flare, you increase emissions, and now it's monetized. It makes a difference. And also, you flared gas that could have increased your sales volume. So this is kind of triple jeopardy. If you keep it in the formation and you produce it later, it's going to go in a sales line and it's going to affect your waste emission fee. So just keep those things in mind. Quad OB was written around source categories. Now, keep in mind, subpart W also is in almost the same aligned source categories. Quad OC is going to be in those same source categories. So it's going to make the connection between your compliance program, subpart W, and reducing your waste emission charges more streamlined. It's just a different way of thinking it. But I want to call your attention to one thing that we kind of had an aha moment on is so Quad OB is anything new, modified, or reconstructed after December 6, 2022, based on those individual source categories. You as an operator, we identified that this is only affecting 2 to 5% of our assets. Well, that's not a big number. What that means is that rest of that 98 to 95% is going to be Quad OC. That's where the lion's share of the work is going to be. But if you work on your compliance program and you're an early adopter of reducing emissions in all these source categories before Quad OC goes final in your state, unless you're California, New Mexico, or Colorado, or the states that already have a very similar Quad OC program, you will be years ahead of a compliance program. You'll make it an inherent process with your operations. It'll be more transparent, and you will also reduce your waste emission fee over and over. Here's kind of one of the aha moments we found is any gas lift compressor. So that we have moved in our field since December 6, 2022. In other words, you went from well pad A to wellhead B because of a frac hit, or you brought on, you had something change. Any gas lift compressor that you've moved since December 6, 2022, it's an applicable source, not so much underneath the reciprocating compressor side, because that's mainly on the midstream portion, because the gas lift compressors on the wellheads are exempt from reciprocating compressor side of it, but they are going to be Quad OB applicable because of the natural gas pneumatics. So what we found is 1/3 of our entire gas lift compressor fleet is now an effective source for pneumatic controller. So our biggest issue right now is effectively driving a reduction of natural gas pneumatics at our wellheads and compressor well pads just for the gas lift compressors on those well pad sites. So really try and understand the definitions of what's going to make a facility applicable to Quad OB. You know, Quad OB versus will this be an affected source just for moving a natural gas compressor? Just understand that and create your strategy around those modifications and reconstruction definitions. Super emitter program. This is, in my opinion, this can be one of the most quintessential surveillance and watchdog program ever instituted by EPA. This one really will keep me up at night. This aerial surveillance program that EPA is going to be rolling out will be the name and shame of the oil and gas industry. Implementing continuous emission monitoring systems, implementing more frequent leak surveys, anything that you can do that will create your own internal surveillance program will help you out in this area. As soon as this program kicks off, which I have not heard an official date when this is going to be, But once this starts, I think you're really going to see fees and fines will be assessed, consent orders will follow, and there will be a large publication of the offenders. I understand that Google has partnered with a couple non-governmental organizations, and they are also going to be part of, I'm going to call it the name and shame campaign once this program kicks off. It's with the Environmental Defense Fund. That's who's partnered with, and they have their own satellite system that'll be part of this super emitter program. Let's look at LDAR and the alternative monitoring technologies. I know Mark will touch on this a little bit here, but one of the key things here with the Quad OB is looking at your OGI program. My recommendation for all operators is increase your frequency. Depending on the state you're in, you might already be in a monthly or a quarterly program. But we found that as you increase these programs, keep in mind, OGI is the one that's approved right now. As you increase your frequency, you will drive down your leaks and the emissions and the calculations off of those leaks. So also, where do you conduct these OGI surveys? My advice is conduct it on all assets. Just don't think I'm going to do Quad OA, Quad OB. Do it on all of them. Because if you don't, you have to use the facility counts that are in subpart W, which aren't as beneficial to calculating your waste emission fee as doing OGI on all your applications, right? What's beautiful about the alternative monitoring program is it can supplant your OGI inspection program. What that means is based upon the frequency, and there's a matrix, EPA has a matrix put out, your frequency and your detection limit, you could do all of your OGI inspections, cover all assets with an aerial flight. What does that mean? It takes, for us, 2 trucks, 2 FLIR cameras, and 2 guys an entire quarter to hit all my assets. What's it mean if I do an aerial flight? In 4 days, they've flown all my assets. I have all my data in one report. And now my LDAR techs, they can be transformed to leak managers instead of leak hunters. They have the data, it's in one report. Now they can go right to a source. The continuous monitoring systems, those are going to be important as these systems get approved. My advice is put these in frequently at, risk rank your facilities, identify the highest opportunity, your highest volume facilities. Those are going to be the ones where your return on investment and the opportunities for finding leaks is going to be the greatest. So risk rank your assets, being an early adopter of alternative monitoring technologies, and have frequent inspections, and use a combination of strategies to create a fit for purpose solution for your company. And it could be different in the different basins and in the different segments that you're operating in. Emission leak calculations. So I did show one slide, the emission leak calculations, and almost all of the emission factors that are coming out in subpart W are going to be significantly higher for the 2025 calendar year, which means you're going to have very little time here in 2024 to adopt appropriate strategies to affect your waste emission charges in 2025. So when these rules come out, create your strategy, look for these opportunities, and keep in mind your emission calculations or your fees are going to be based off of your previous non-leaking inspection. So increasing your frequency to lower your emission rates, it also helps identify potential or prevent the super emitters. So in other words, you're identifying something before it can become a super emitter. That is going to be the name of the game, the strategy, right? So once again, these leak rate calculations for the 2025 compliance year can be as high as 8 times. So develop your strategy now, increase your inspections, look at the alternatives, put your strategy in place. Record keeping. When we looked at Subpart W year over year, every year we have identified little nuggets that we could do to improve our record keeping, to improve our objective evidence, to verify compliance. What is essentially happening is Subpart W has been hijacked. It is now truly a carbon accounting form. Every CFO in every corporation is now going to be asking, I need your waste emission charge. I need to know those projections. It's going to have, it potentially will be something that is going to be audited. It will create a requirement for attestation. It will create, the paradigm is shifting. Understand the importance of all the data going into the Subpart W, why your record keeping is going to be important, how you're going to collect it, refine your record keeping. And what you're going to identify is you need to have more frequent data collection. So we have decided to go on monthly and recalculate those waste emission charges every quarter. So we're going to create a projection every quarter what that potential fee is, and use that timing as opportunity to strategically identify different areas where we can reduce those fees.
Yeah, one of the amazing things is we get to work with really impressive customers, okay, and roll up the sleeves and dig into all these new rules, try to unpack them, which is what I've done with the EPA cheat sheet and other things. But it's so great to have clients like Russ who really dig in, try to figure it out, and share their journey, with other operators about how they're moving from where they are today to where they need to go. And so one of the things that when I read as a former IT guy, I read these regs is try to summarize them up and say, okay, so we kind of know how you have to do it manually, but what could I do to automate some of these different rules and things? So, we've looked at, as Russ mentioned, big increase in LDAR. And in fact, LDAR, AVO, Method 22, all these inspections you got to do, moving from, emission factors to empirical and even the changes that are happening in the, emission factors coming up, the waste emission charge, continuous combustion efficiency, and, dialing in your VRUs and your combustion efficiency so you can get higher throughput. And then of course that, Russ's favorite part, the super emitter program. How do you deal with all that? So, these are, in summary, when we deal with our clients, there's usually 3 groups inside of an oil and gas company: the HSC part, ops, and then sustainability. And I did a webinar with another client, Pure West, where we talked a lot about this, MMRV. And so what we've done is said, all right, we wanted to create this sort of autonomous operator, which we codename Minerva, and say, how do we automate as much as possible? How do we focus on remote monitoring management? How do we use engineering first principles to unpack and automate regulations? And then, create a device that could help with all of this, a sensor fusion platform that could work in all weather conditions and so on, and then give Minerva a super fast brain so she can process hundreds of data points in seconds. And so we came up with this process, a repeatable process called M4. And I'm going to focus primarily today on the monitor side because that's a lot but we could also get in the measure, monetize, and manage. So on the monitor side, what we do is we first set up a digital twin. And we originally created this digital twin because what was happening, we'd have an installer go out on a site and we're like, where do we place the tower? Where do we place this camera so that it has the best viewpoint, the right height, the right distance to all the objects, so we can see everything on a site for continuous OGI monitoring. You can see here that this digital twin allows you to literally virtually walk through a site, and this would have been super handy. I was with another client who's trying to get a permit, and the regulators were really struggling to see what's this site going to look like when it's actually built. And I think in the future, we show them a digital twin, they'll say, oh, now I know exactly what this is going to look like. But what it allows us to do is set up the configuration, the tower location of the cameras ahead of time. So when the installers are there, they know exactly where to put the camera, the angles it's going to see, and so on and so forth. This particular one you're seeing in a multi-well facility, all that stuff you saw walking through, that was a 30-minute setup by one of our techs. The camera system we have, which we call Minerva Sensor Fusion, this new camera system has multiple optical, infrared, and OGI setup and a built-in gimbal and stuff. And so we have this platform is perfect because we can use that to do gas leak detection, quantification, liquid leak, fire and smoke, autonomous gate guard, tank level monitoring, PPE detection, compressor monitoring. So all the things you need for compliance, but even beyond the things that ops wants so that it can, they can reduce the call outs. We do have 3 versions of this. So we have a Minerva Pro, Minerva, and then a Halo, which is for your legacy sites. It's a methane only camera. And so we can then, once you set this up, so you can see here is set up on a tower and whatnot, we can then fine tune it and further define the tour stops, and you can get right down to that component level, right? So you can even draw objects around components, and then we associate that later, you'll see, with a ProMax model. So we know exactly what we're looking at, and we can get very detailed in terms of the detections and the quantifications and so on and so forth. Russ mentioned in particular that we're able to find a VRU that wasn't functioning within 10 minutes, send an alert, and so on and so forth. So there's 3 of the very common things we see: tanks overpressuring, cold venting, and in this case, a pump truck loadout. Now, we also give operators ability to do a live view. So let's say that it goes at a tour stop, you find something, and you say, oh, wait, let me dial in and see what this thing is. So you can literally take control of an OGI camera. Now, mind you, this is remotely, okay? There's nobody on site. This could be 3 hours away, and take control of it, take a look at what you want to look at, change the pan tilt. And then as soon as you're done looking, you know what's wrong, you click a button and it goes right back onto the tour, okay? And the way it works is we have our cameras, goes to an edge device. We connect to every SCADA system out there with either MQTT or Modbus, and you get alerts through SCADA, or through our platform, we send the exceptions up that Russ mentioned before. And we got a government certified in Colorado called the Alt-AIM, where we had to prove source level detection, blind testing, prove equivalency that our autonomous LDR was equivalent to a human doing monthly OGI inspections. Alternative work practice, we were endorsed by Civitas and PDC, and we got EPA Region 8 approval. And I heard some good news, Russ, that we're going through the same approval at the federal level. And the person that approved us at EPA Region 8 is the same person who's going to be working on our application at the federal level. So that's really good news. We got this Alt-AIM approval letter, which means that once you use Clean Connect, it replaces regulatory monthly LDAR, or because they have monthly LDAR in Colorado, AVO inspections, and tank emission monitoring. So again, we wanted to help our clients eliminate a lot of the regulatory call-outs and do as much remote monitoring and management as possible. It has a workflow, and this workflow is being enhanced bit by bit. And I'm going to show you an example, but we use AI detection, assisted diagnostics. We have a repair system. We can verify the repair, and they do all that bottoms-up inventory reporting, and then we use that data to retrain the model. So here's an example of another thing, PPE detection, okay? So it's a different kind of, inspection type of thing. We do a virtual gate guard, where we can look at every truck, read the license plates, log those, and even allow you to say, hey, this is a employee or a contractor or the regulator, set different alert levels, things like that. You can do smoke detection, okay? And you can look for different qualities of that, the smoke or the flame. Here's a couple more examples of smoke detection. It works during day or night, okay? And here's something that we're getting ready to release, okay, our Method 22 autonomous inspections. So you all have to do, check those look for any kind of smoke or whatever, on a monthly basis. And, you got to look at it for 15 minutes and then say, hey, did it smoke within a minute? Anyway, we're now automating all that because we have cameras doing continuous inspection. Why not handle your method 22 as well? Allow you to set those and automate those and then do all the appropriate record keeping. We are meeting with the EPA method 22 person to get this whole automated system approved. One of our clients does 3,300 inspections a week of just method 22. So imagine the savings that is by having it, automated. All of those alerts go into a dashboard, which you can then sort by, geographical location or type of alert. You can set different kind of alerts, who gets alerts depending on the size or duration or whatnot. So that is an overview of Monitor. Just real quickly on the measure side, essentially what we do is we do computer vision. That all goes in an edge device, and we tie into your IoT devices. We run those through a brand new feature, which I covered last month in a webinar with Pure West, but the ProMax version 6 data exchange allows us to essentially have a live data reading, live mass balance, live non-fugitive emissions, and get some really detailed stuff that allows us to produce. If you look at this, you'll say, wait, those are all the things that are in subpart W. Those are all the details. Yes, indeed. And we are working very closely with Colorado to get this as an automated empirical emissions inventory created. Okay. And the big idea is that all these emissions inventories are actually coming together. Subpart W, Colorado GHG intensity, OGMP 2.0 level 5, and the new MMRV. They're all starting to merge together. We solve for the hardest one of those, and therefore we get, we don't want to have you to do 4 different things, do one thing and have 4 different outputs. Okay. And we have this layered system, so this is all your data. We're creating a natural language query process because there's going to be a ton of data. So you can literally type in things like, hey, did I have any super emitters on October 12th in this basin? And, up comes a report, right? All the back-end SQL stuff we would handle for you. And we also produce an NFT that could be sold in different ways. So anyway, that's that. And with the managed side, one of the things we set out to do in the beginning was do autonomous LDAR. So, we're working with Cimarron very closely to see if we can solve very common problems and say, hey, instead of sending a guy out to deal with cold venting or tanks overpressuring, what if we could combine some stuff with Cimarron and prevent those from happening in the first place? So we do tank level monitoring very accurately, right? And we do tank emission monitoring. Well, what if we combine those two and could predict when a tank would overpressure, then send a signal to a smart VRU, relieve the pressure, and eliminate the tanks from overpressuring, thus eliminating one of the big sources potentially of a super emitter. Same thing with using our cameras, using their DRAMAX 2.0 and optimizing the flare so that it's always perfectly running. They have a new device, this DRAMAX here, and we combine it with our cameras to come up with a DRAMAX 2. Again, keeping everything compliant, trying to prevent those super emitters from happening. So anyway, like I said, I just showed you, how you can start to automate some of these things, which has an absolute impact on the waste emission charge and getting that down. What we offer is a 3-day pilot. Okay, so we bring a trailer out there. We agree ahead of time on a success criteria. This was actual success criteria for one of the super majors. That's a customer where they wanted to see methane gas leak, liquid leak, flame and smoke, autonomous gate guard, hard hat, and tank level monitoring. And we were able to prove all those with blind testing in 3 days. So anyway, if you'd like to schedule that, you all have my email and you can do that. So Russ, I want to thank you for doing this and sharing all the experience you've done. I guarantee you we'll have another one of these in 6 months after a lot of the rules are finalized and you've learned a lot more and we have too, and figured out new ways of automating all this. So thanks again, Russ. Appreciate you doing this.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right.